Welcome, everybody. Again, this is the latest, the third in our series on AI webinars. AI as a learning partner, helping students think, create, and learn more deeply is today's topic. We're here with our friend and colleague, Jean Mandernock, who's joining us from Nebraska. And Jean is a leader of working with technology and education. And of course, we're supporting just the idea that we want to promote more about learning about AI in higher ed because it's everywhere. It's not going away. And I know it's the sort of thing where there's both confusion about it, about not just what it is. And you can see some of our past webinars on AI 101, but also about what it can do and what it can be. And that's where we're getting into with this and the next few sessions that we have between the now and August, the first Wednesday of every month. So I'll throw a link in the chat where you can actually sign up for future ones if you haven't already. But without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jean. So again, thanks for being here. And thanks again, Jean, for your time.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone that's joining with us today. I know this is a crazy time of the year as people are wrapping up semesters and getting ready for the next term, and I really appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your day to think about how can we actually start embracing AI? Because the reality is it's everywhere. If you're teaching right now, there is no doubt that you're trying to figure out what do we do about students using AI? Because the students know about it, they are using it, and the problem really isn't that students are using AI. It's that students don't know how to use AI well. And so, what technically is happening is students are using AI. Sometimes they're using it to kind of try to help improve what they're writing. Other times they're totally using it to bypass the learning process and they're just producing artifacts with it. But the problem is, from a faculty perspective, we don't know how they're using it. And if we look at the research that's coming out right now, when we survey students, they're overwhelmingly telling us a few things. First of all, they're telling us, yes, we're using it. Second, they're saying, I don't really know how I'm supposed to be using it. It's a little bit vague. They aren't really sure if it's going to be considered cheating. They aren't really sure if their professors are okay with it or not okay with it. And they're fully aware of the fact that they need to know how to use AI for their future. So what's happening is some of them are kind of dabbling, trying to figure out where that line is. Some of them are trying to avoid it because they don't want to get in trouble. And others are literally using it far and wide and hiding that they're using it because they aren't sure how to use it correctly. And that's what we want to talk about today. If we want our students to use AI in a meaningful way that actually supports learning rather than bypassing it, we have to lead that charge. We have to be willing to talk to them about what effective AI use looks like. We need to start looking at strategies for bringing AI into our teaching and our assessment. And we have to give them explicit guidance on ways they maybe can use AI to be a more effective learner. And so instead of asking, are they using AI or did students use AI on this assignment? I really want you to start shifting your thinking and asking yourself, if I have students do this assignment and I assume that they use AI, would their learning be visible? Because AI isn't the problem. The problem is that AI is becoming a confounding variable that makes it really, really hard for us to look at any given assignment or artifact and know if the student learned. Historically, we would give them an assignment, students would do it, they would give it back. We would use that as a proxy to determine if they had learned or not. Well, now we give them our assignment. Students use AI, they give it back. We don't know how they used AI. We don't know if they learned, and we don't know if that assignment represented anything that we actually care about. But the problem wasn't really AI, it's the assumptions we're making about how students work. And so, what we really need to do is start being more explicit how we want them to use AI and how we can bring that in. Because we often have assignments that are just about students spitting back to us correct answers. We give them an assignment. We want them to go out and look things up, to investigate. Really, we want them to dive into the content. And then we want them to show us that they've dove into that content by giving us back the right answer. Well, AI will do that for them. And our students are nothing if they are not ruthlessly efficient. And they care about their grades. So if we're going to continue to give them assignments that simply ask them to produce a correct answer, they're going to use AI because they're going to do that assignment as efficiently as possible, and they're going to try to make sure they get the best grade they can possibly get. And so we really need to start rethinking, what do we care about? Because while we maybe cared about the correct answer, more likely than not, what we really cared about was that students were thinking, that they were taking the time to dive into the content, that they were thinking about that content, that they were reflecting on how that content might apply in new situations, that they were evaluating, that they were comparing. We've always cared about thinking. It's just that historically, we use them giving us a right answer as evidence of that thinking. And now AI is interfering with that. But rather than fighting I really think we need to think about, how do we bring AI in to help us? Because it actually opens up so many possibilities that have not been available before. We always cared about thinking, but when there's one faculty member and lots of students, we didn't really have a way of seeing that thinking. We care about the process of learning, but it's a lot more efficient to evaluate the product of learning. AI now opens up possibilities. And it says, do you want to see how students are questioning, how they're thinking, how they're engaging with material? I can have an AI log where I see that thinking, where I see that process. And so the first thing I want to encourage you to do is rethink what you ask students to do. And that starts by you asking yourself, for this course and this learning objective, what do I care about? What's important to me? Is it the right answer, or is it the process of getting to that answer? Did I care about their thinking and their evaluation and their judgment? Because AI now lets us see that. And I want to show you a couple examples here. These are things I do in my class. I teach psychology, and I teach across the board in psychology. So I have everything from general psychology, which are, the large lecture halls with 100 students, all the way up to advanced doctoral statistics with 6 students where we're really diving into our methodology. And there are AI strategies that can help across the board to really actually improve students' learning. So the first thing that I started to do was I started thinking about, if I care about a student's understanding of factual information, rather than asking them to give me the factual information to prove that they understand it, I'm now asking them to interact with the content the way they would in the real world, which means chances are they're going to go to Google, they're going to go to some AI program, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, whatever program that is, and they're probably going to start by asking their question there. So that's where I'm starting now with my assignments. And so a lot of my assignments will literally now say, today we're learning about, let's pretend we're learning about cognitive dissonance. It's a topic we don't learn about in social psychology. And I'll still tell students, go to AI and say, tell me about cognitive dissonance. And I just start very briefly and I say, if you're going to truly understand this content, let's start by critiquing and evaluating what we can find about this topic. And so once they get that topic, whatever it is, so again, go back to your learning objectives, whatever topic you're looking at this week, this module, whatever it is, and tell students, start with AI, start with Google, start with Gemini. It doesn't matter to me, because what I care about is your ability to be an effective consumer of that information. And that means you need to know if the information is accurate. What is missing? Are there things that it doesn't tell you? So in this example, they would start and they have this little thing where they say, okay, cognitive dissonance is a concept from psychology and it talks about it. And then I would ask them, okay, it says, here's the classic example from Leon Fessinger about this. Tell me the critiques of Fessinger's research, because I want them to think about this. I want them to know the conflicting views. I want them to think about what's missing. I want them to think about what's potentially inaccurate. Then I might tell them, ask it what modern research on this topic exists. Now, when I'm having students do this assignment, I generally am going to teach them on this topic exists. I'm generally going to teach them how to do this process because students are not good at knowing how to prompt AI. And it's not about sophisticated prompts. It's about actually thinking about what they care about. And so the first time we do this assignment, I usually give the students the prompts as actual little stems where they fill in the blank. So one of my examples from my general psychology class just last week, we happened to be studying our topic on learning theories. And I told students, I am interested in learning more about, and then there was a little blank that said, insert the theory you want to learn more about here. And so students would copy and paste that prompt. They would insert their little piece to say what they were interested in learning about. Then I gave them follow up prompts that said things like, what conflicting information exists here? What gaps might not you be telling me about? What are there cultural differences in our understanding of this topic? So I gave students 5 prompts to follow up. And then the student's assignment was, and then I want you to think about what you've read, what you've learned, and I want you to come up with 3 more prompts and ask more questions. That's it. Because what I cared about was, could they ask a good question? Could they evaluate the response? As they read through it, could they start to think about what was missing? What questions do I have that aren't yet answered? And so their assignment was not write a report on learning theories or take a learning theory and apply it to your life. Their assignment was learn about it, ask questions about it, use AI because I want you to be an effective consumer of information. The next time we do that assignment, which is coming up next week, I'm actually going to tell students we practiced when we were learning about learning theories on how to prompt and learn more with AI. This time, your assignment is to learn more about, and then I'm going to give them some topics to choose from. And I'm going to say, but I want to see how you learn about it. So your job is to ask the questions, to dig in deeper, to think about what's missing. And my evaluation is going to be based on the quality of your questions and your interaction. I'm looking for insightfulness. I'm looking for thoughtfulness. I'm looking for your critical inquiry of that information. Now, when I gave this assignment, one of my students immediately raised their hand and they said, well, can I use AI to help me come up with those questions? And I said, sure, because you still have to figure out which ones are good and which ones aren't good and which ones match that content. Because what I care about is your ability to dive into that content and make it make sense. Another assignment that I like to use is actually asking students to compare AI outputs. And there's a couple advantages of this assignment. First of all, they learn about whatever topic we're learning about simply by reading that output and engaging with that information. Second, we start to weave in a little bit of AI literacy with students starting to ask questions then like, well, why did ChatGPT tell me this and Gemini told me this? And then why does Claude give me a slightly different answer? Or why am I getting this answer from one? Why do they not agree? Students start to then ask the questions to understand how AI works and how it can produce different information depending on how the question is asked, depending on what model it is, depending on which system they're using. And so even though the point of the assignment is not about AI literacy, we start to weave in an understanding where they become better users of the technology. So then in this assignment, I will simply tell them, pick 3 AI tools. I don't care which ones. And I'll give them a whole list. So I'll tell them, you can choose from ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, Claude, Perplexity, Poe, whichever ones you would like. Doesn't matter to me at all. What I want you to do is take the exact same prompt, and it will be something we're studying in class. So in my statistics class, we just got done doing a unit on correlations. We did this activity, and I actually said, I want you to go in and you're going to give it some data, and you're going to ask it to run the correlation and then interpret that correlation for you. And I want you to compare and see, first of all, did it all do the math the same? And if it didn't do the math the same, which one do you think is accurate and why? Do you need to do the math yourself? Did some of them agree? Did some of them not agree? So let's start with that. Second of all, were the interpretations the same or different? And if they were different, how do we make sense of it? Were any of them wrong, or were they just missing information? If you use the exact same prompt, how do we explain the fact that some explained it this way and some explained it this way? I'll tell you in that example that I did with my class, the vast majority of them agreed generally, but they would emphasize different things. And this led to a great discussion in class where we started talking about why it would emphasize different things. And some of the students themselves started to look in and they said, oh, could it be because I have used ChatGPT for other questions? And so it was trying to look at my past history and make predictions and use examples and interpretations based on things I've chatted about within that. And I was like, yes, let's talk about the algorithms. Let's talk about how it uses its memory. Let's talk about the settings that you have on whether it remembers your past chats or if it doesn't remember your past chats and how that influences the information that it gives you. So not only could we dive in to look at, do we understand correlations? Can we interpret correlations? What does it mean? But then we also looked at different examples that were generated about correlations, which examples were more or less helpful, and how do we make sense of which model? Students overwhelmingly tell me this is one of the most helpful things for having them understand AI because students historically have approached AI the way they approach Google, as if it's grabbing a single answer and just reporting it to them. And they don't understand that that's not how AI works, that AI is looking at patterns and it's making predictions based on its training data and based on its algorithms and what it's saved about you, and that it brings that all together. And when students start to understand that, it completely changes the way they interact with AI. Because now they realize, like, it's going to give me information that's probably correct, but it can't give me a source for that information because that's not how AI works. AI went out and looked for patterns to answer the question. And so it could give me a correct answer, but it couldn't always give me a correct source for that answer. And students discovered that themselves when they started comparing and justifying and diving into why different AI tools would give them completely different interpretations for the exact same prompt. Another place that I like to use it is in helping students to really dive into what I call the shades of gray. In psychology, we don't have a lot of things that are totally right or totally wrong. There's a whole lot that depends on context, it depends on population, it depends on exactly how you're interpreting it and how you're applying it. And students really struggle with those shades of gray. They like to think of the world as if there is a single right way. And so I'll tell students, if this is your position, go into AI and tell it, I want you to generate counter arguments for me. I want you to argue against me. And AI becomes a really good counterpoint kind of system for them to test some of those assumptions. And so one of the classes I'm teaching right now is ethics, and we were just studying the Milgram obedience study. And I told students, I want you to start by taking a position on how you feel. Was this ethical? Was it appropriate? Was the information we gained from that study, does it justify the potential risk that it had? And I want you to go to AI and tell it your position. So I'm going to say, I think the Milgram study was justified based on what we learned in relation to the ethical risks. And then you tell AI what you want it to do. I want you to fight against me and debate the other side. And so I give students the basic prompt that they have to fill in that starts with, here's what I think. And then I want you as the AI tool to generate these counter arguments against me. And so now AI will take either position. It doesn't care which one. And so here it comes back through and it will give this whole, generational thing. And then I've told students, what I care about is your ability to justify your position. So fight with the AI, debate with the AI, but you have to be convincing. You have to justify your position. You need to bring in research. You need to be able to make valid points to justify your position while recognizing and understanding the counter arguments against your position. And then all I have students turn in for this assignment is they go to the little button that says share and they click that and they copy the link and they share the link with me. And then I could now go to this and they turn in the link, I click on the link and I can go and I can see their counter arguments. And if I care about their thinking, I can now look and be like, oh, they didn't really hit this. They didn't dive in here. They really missed this big point we talked about in class, whatever it might be. But just the way they debate and fight and argue with AI gives me insights in their ability to really think in those shades of gray. Another thing that's fun to do with students, because again, students get really tired of just the produce an answer. You can actually ask AI to give you content that is not completely factually correct, and then give it to students and say, correct the misconceptions. So you might walk into AI and say, I need an overview of, I'm just going to go with cognitive dissonance again. You can tell that that's what we were studying yesterday. I need an overview of cognitive dissonance. Include some minor errors so that students can analyze and figure out what is correct and what is not. And AI will now very quickly give me as many of these different summaries and things. I could come back to it and I could say, make them a little bit more subtle, make these errors not so obvious. I could ask it to relate it to something that was happening on our campus, something that's happening in their own lives. Then you can even have students generate some of these. And so you can tell students, go to AI and have it generated. And I want you to trade papers with each other and see if you can find the errors. And then correct the other person's and give it back and see, were you able to find those errors? Could you figure out what was accurate and what was inaccurate? What you'll find when you start bringing this in is that students didn't necessarily want to cheat with AI. They just don't always think about, well, how would I actually use it correctly? How would I use this in a meaningful way to support my learning? And it can be really small changes in your teaching. You do not have to start by overhauling everything that you do in your course. Maybe you pick out one assignment that right now you're basically quizzing them. You're asking them to explain this, tell me about this, pick the correct answer. And you can just take that exact topic and those learning objectives, and you can tell students, instead of asking you to explain it to me, I want you to evaluate this AI explanation. Or what I typically do is go get an AI explanation and then annotate it. And I'll tell students, I just want you to take that AI generated response and I want you to go through and I want you to tell me, is there research that supports this? Does this match what our textbook says? What questions arise as you're reading it? And so I'll give students a few of those different areas to focus on and I'll say, dive in. Was this accurate? Was it not accurate? And what they generally come back to me and say is most of it was accurate, but it was missing things. It was oversimplified. It was kind of generic. It was kind of general. And then that leads to another great discussion where I say, okay, so if you're using AI to help you write things, which is, the most common thing students are doing, what's the likelihood that your answers aren't coming in that generally look good, generally sound good, but are probably pretty surface level and probably pretty simplified and maybe a little bit too generic to actually meaningfully show your learning? And then students, even if you're going to use AI to help you with your writing, how do you engage with it in a meaningful way so that you're going beyond that? I had a student the other day ask me, they're like, so do you still write by yourself? And I was like, never. I use AI now because I start and I'll be like, not that, change that, simplify that. You need to dive in deeper here. Here's what I meant here. AI helps me with the writing as long as it's my thinking. And that's what we care about with our students. I don't care if they're using AI. It only bothers me if the AI is interfering with my ability to see their thinking, because now all I know is what AI can say, and I don't know anything about what their thinking is. But when we start teaching them to engage and collaborate with AI, now they start to dive in and start to tell some of their thinking to AI and dive in and have conversations with AI. So even if that final product that they give me is AI generated writing, there's a difference between generic AI generated writing and student engaged AI generated collaborative writing. And they often start to see that when we ask them to evaluate these kinds of general responses, because it is usually correct, but it's usually simple, it's usually generic, and it's usually not telling us anything overly meaningful. And when students can see that in other writing, then they start to dive in on how do they change that in their own. And so structure their writing for them. Tell them, feel free to use it. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell me the things you changed. I want you, in addition to submitting that final product, I also want you to submit your log of how you got there. I just want to see what you were changing, what you were diving into, what resources you were bringing in. If you uploaded 5 articles and said summarize and bring these together as themes, that's okay, but I want you to dive in and I want you to say, well, what about this theme? You missed this. Or I read this and thought it was important. You didn't mention it. Why didn't you mention it? Because that's how students actually start to think. We have conditioned our students so much to focus only on a product that gets graded that they're willing to bypass that struggle, that cognitive interaction where they're saying what if and what about, because they're trying to get that good product for the good grade. So let's grade that process. Let's tell them, I care just as much about you saying, what about this? Or I thought this, or you didn't mention this, as I care about that product. Because let's face it, AI can produce the product. I want to know, did you ask the right questions? Did you notice something that went beyond the surface level that maybe AI didn't notice? So we asked students, analyze the weaknesses, dive in, see where it was just too simplified, where it over summarized. Whenever we do this, the other thing that students are always amazed by is they'll be like, okay, AI told me this, and then I pushed back, and AI said, oh, sorry about that, and corrected itself. Why did it do that? And again, we go back to AI generates predictable patterns. But when you point out nuances to the pattern, when you point out anomalies to the pattern, when you point out what ifs that are not completely aligned with the pattern, AI will recognize and be like, oh, yeah, but that doesn't mean that that's where it started. And that's when they start to really think. And so then we ask them, dive in, verify the claims. Even if the claim is correct, is the source of it correct? Because this is the place that students get tripped up. They will go in and they will say, tell me this and give me the source for this information. And they'll often say, because I need 5 APA style sources. And it will spit out 5 APA style sources. And then I tell the students, go find each one and make sure that you've linked to me the article or submitted the article with it. And that's when they start diving in and they're like, well, they don't even exist. I can't find it. And I'm like, you can't find it because it was hallucinated. AI looked for patterns. And so it gave you a name that it probably found out there in the patterns. It gave you a title that was a compilation of titles that were probably similar that it was finding. And it probably even gave you a real journal, one that they saw a lot in the research. But it put it together in a way that's not a real source. And so when students understand that, then they can start going back and saying, okay, well, where would I find this source? How would I find this source? And you can now teach them to prompt or teach them the better AI tools for when they're doing research. Because there are specific AI tools that will do research for them that are not as likely to hallucinate, but those are not the generic generative AI tools they tend to go to. And then just tell the students, you can use AI for this, but I need to see all the revisions. And typically it's not going to be like, I needed your first draft, I need your second draft, and I need your last draft, because that's not how collaborative writing with AI works. It really is share your chat log. I want to see the documents you uploaded. I want to see your questions. I want to see your arguments. I want to see where you corrected it by telling it, not that, don't use that voice. That's not how I would write. Because that is thinking and that is communicating. It's just a really different way of doing it than we have ever historically done. And when we can start getting students to do that, now they start collaborating creatively with AI rather than just using AI to do the assignments for them. And so students now will start to say, help me brainstorm ideas. I like this idea. Tell me more about this idea. Help me find research related to this one idea that I like. What could I do with that idea? Help me think more about it. Because thinking is a social collaborative process. And while we could say, I would love for students to sit and talk to their classmate or talk to me or whatever, AI gives us a really functional way to do that. And so talk, ask questions. The main reason that a student doesn't raise their hand in class and offer up this kind of collaborative engagement is they're always worried about being wrong. And they don't want to look silly in front of their classmates. They don't want to take a risk. AI lets them take that risk without it being risky because they can say, was this a dumb idea? Would this even work? What about this? Or this is what I was thinking. Would that be possible? And it starts to actually empower them to think more deeply because they can get that feedback without feeling like they have to put themselves out there. And so ask students, just make it visible. The problem isn't AI, it's when the use of AI hides my ability to assess what you know. And so tell me, how did you use AI? Which tools did you use? What did you do with it? What did it miss? Were there gaps? Were there errors? Were there things that you struggled with because it wasn't quite doing it the way that you wanted it to do it? And how did your thinking change because of this? My son is graduating college on Saturday, actually, and he has a degree in engineering. And he said, we are actually encouraged to use AI for everything because our job isn't to produce it. Our job is to know what we're producing is good. So, yeah, it can write the code, but did the code work? Was the code effective? If it wasn't effective, did I know what to ask and how to change it to get it to a functional place? And so he goes on every assignment we turn in. I'll turn it in and I'll say, I was using Claude for the original code, but it had these errors in it, and I could not get Claude to fix the errors on its own. So rather than me recoding it, I went over to Gronk. Gronk was able to take the code and I could get the errors to fix in the code there. And then when I reran it here, it's all about how did I use the AI? How did I engage with it? And could I make it meaningful? Did I know what it was that I produced? Can I talk effectively about that content? And so, as you're thinking about this, it is not about generic AI literacy. It really is about how do I bring AI into my course for whatever specific learning objective I'm working on to help my students learn it better. And so, you do want to anchor it to your course materials. Oftentimes, I will go in and I'll teach students, I'll say, depending on which model you use, it is going to use lots of the training data out there. For this particular assignment, I would like us to actually limit it to just the following, 5 articles or whatever. And then I show students, here's how you go in and tell it that you want it to be a closed system or that you don't want it to ask for outside information. And it's now going to focus only on the content that we gave it here so we can actually use this case study, this concept, this textbook, whatever it might be. And then ask students, are you thinking? Beyond this surface level explanation that probably looks really nice and is generally accurate, why does this matter? How does this impact anything? One of my favorite assignments to do, and I layer this on to so many of the things I do, is it's the 1-minute video reflection. And I'll tell students at the end of this assignment, when you're submitting your chat log or you're submitting your artifact, whatever that final thing is that they're submitting to me, I also need you to submit a 1-minute video reflection in which they often answer the so what. So why did this matter? Was AI helpful in this context? Did it help you learn more? Did it not? Do we care about this? How can we make this meaningful? I'll share another story with you. I've got 3 kids in college right now, so I get lots of stories about how college students are using AI from my children included. And I share a ChatGPT account with my kids. And one day I was sitting here working and I notice on the screen that my daughter is just uploading questions with her phone, one at a time, and just asking AI for the answers. And I called her up and I was like, why are you cheating? Like, what is going on here? And she was like, Mom, this is the dumbest assignment. It is literally, we can look it up in the textbook and it doesn't even matter. And we can take the quiz as many times as we want. And he's only going to record the highest grade. This assignment is just dumb. So I'm just making sure I get the grade and I can move on. And I said, did it occur to you that maybe the reason he has the assignment set up this way, that it's a quiz before you come to class, you can take it as many times as you want, you can look up the answers, he's only recording the highest one. Maybe it wasn't about assessing your understanding. Maybe it was about motivating your engagement with the book, making sure you had read, you had looked things up, you had thought about the content so that when you came to class, you were prepared to talk and engage and ask questions. Maybe it had nothing to do with that quiz's assessment. He just put a grade on it to motivate you to actually do it and to engage. At which point she said, well, he didn't say that. And the moral of this story is students often don't know the what. They don't understand why we're asking them to do what we're asking them to do. But when we can give them a pedagogical reason that ties into here's why you're learning this content, here's why I'm asking you to do what I'm asking you to do, they are much more likely to engage in a meaningful way. But when they think it's a hoop and they don't see the purpose and they don't understand why they do it, they're much more likely to use AI just to bypass the learning. So in some cases, the problems with AI aren't an AI problem at all. It's a pedagogy problem. AI is just now giving them a really fast and easy solution around the pedagogy problem. And so when you're designing it, think about what is the so what? And have I made that clear and explicit to students? And then help them on the prompting. Students still are treating AI much like they would treat Google, that they ask a question and they take the answer. And that's not how AI works. AI is a collaboration and it's a conversation. And so helping them design prompts that allow them to engage meaningfully with our course content is going to help them to learn. And so it's not really about you should be using AI or you shouldn't use AI. It's in any given context for this activity and this learning objective. Should I use AI here? And if so, how? And if not, why? Because when students can understand the reason we need them to cognitively struggle and the reason we want them to not use AI, because we need you to think it through and to like really build that schema and we explain all that to them, they're more likely to not use AI, particularly if our grading structure is also aligned. So we can't tell students, I want you to cognitively struggle and then put a lot of grading weight on it. Because at that point now, they're going to be motivated to get the good grade and they're not going to cognitively struggle. They're going to go get the good grade. So we have to think about our grading structure and what we're asking students to do. Because if we want them to continue to have ownership of that thinking, we need to make sure we're rewarding the thinking with the grades. So we're putting the effort, that grading effort, where we want them to spend their time. And so when we tell students, I need you to cognitively struggle, here's why. I need you to build that schema. And I don't want you to use AI for this task, but I want you to do the task. So I'm going to put a low grade on it just to motivate engagement with the task. But know that it's not about the product here. It's about spending time in the cognitive struggle. And that grade is going to reflect the time you spent in the cognitive struggle. And then other things, we're going to say, you know what, this has a higher grade. Chances are they're going to use AI to help them. But here's where I'm going to make sure the process of that shows up within that grading structure. So I'm not just grading what the final pretty thing looks like, but I'm also grading what it took to get there. And then have students say, like, here's where I used it, here's where I didn't, here's why I didn't, here's what I was learning and how I was engaging in a meaningful way. Part of this process, though, is also just showing students how to use it as a tool. And students in almost any given class take notes. And what the research tells us is after they take those notes, what they usually do is they just read them again and again and again, repetition, which is about the least effective way to learn. But students don't necessarily know a better way to learn. And here is one of the places where AI can be incredibly helpful is you actually teach students. Your notes are good. Taking notes is good. There's a lot of research on the value of taking notes, but then you have to do something with them. Just taking them isn't enough. So the first thing that you can do is you can actually just come here to AI. I asked my college-age daughter to share her notes with me. So let me find my file here of AI notes. Oops. AI student notes. Get the names going correctly. I swear it is here. AI student notes. There it is. Sorry. Here's some from, I believe this was a chem class. She literally just has the output of her chem notes. She can take that PDF of this. She can do a screenshot off her iPad, and she can simply say, review these notes. What is missing? Is anything inaccurate? And she could upload pages of these notes. And it can review the handwritten notes that they simply can snap a picture of. And it will tell her, like, here are some things. You have a tenfold ratio statement, but that's not quite correct. Here's the right steps for it. Or you mentioned the Y buffers. I don't even know what this stuff means. This is her chem class. So if I have any chemistry professors in here, I think this should make sense to you. But it goes through, you're missing this. You should probably have used this. So students now can take their notes after class, and I tell all my students at the end of class, don't forget to upload your notes, do a review of them, make sure there's nothing missing and inaccurate, and AI can do that for them. And so then it can now clarify and clean up those notes for them. The other thing it can do, and let me do another example here. Here's some notes. This is from my daughter who's in high school. I believe these are English notes. You could actually just ask it to organize them. Organize these into a structure to help me remember. So they can use it to make mnemonic devices. They can use it to help them create that cognitive structure. It looks like here they must have been studying the Renaissance. So it came back and it said, okay, if you're studying the Renaissance, here's the big picture. Here's the main idea. Here are your big figures that you need to keep in mind. Here's the big thing that was happening with art. But it can just take those notes and help them put it into a structure, because so often in class, students are just writing and they aren't thinking about the big picture and they aren't thinking about an organizational structure. They're just writing. And then they can also just ask it to critique their notes. So now I'll grab here a page of, I don't even know what class this is, another page of handwritten notes. And they can say what is unclear or weak. And it can now review their notes for them, and it can tell them what they need to have. This one must have been something with chemistry as well. It says, it said each L contains atoms. This is awkward, confusing. Here's a better way to say that. And here's a real life example. If you want to see how my daughter was just studying for her chem final that she took yesterday and then immediately texted me that she was sure she had failed. I doubt it, but she started. And at the very beginning of her study sesh, she said, let's go, so you can see how long she studied with it. She uploaded all of her notes. So here were her 5-unit notes that she uploaded. And she just told it, I'm trying to prepare for my chem final. Can you help me? This is what I have. The final is tomorrow. You can tell she was in panic mode. And then it sort of gives her the big picture. We can scroll down. She said, here's some study guides. Help me fill it out. So then she filled out the study guides. Then she came down here and she said, can you give me some better points on the buffer titrations and solubility? Then it gave her some points on that. She came down and said, start from the beginning, ask me questions that you think will be on the exam based on the files that I uploaded. And then it asked her questions and she just sat there and quizzed herself. And then somewhere, if we kept scrolling, she comes in and says, based on everything I've answered so far, tell me which part of my notes I still need to study and which part I've already mastered. And so she practiced, she went through, she started to narrow down where she needed to spend her time. And these are all things that she did not to use AI to bypass her learning, but to help her really understand the chem notes. So once we start teaching them how to use it, they have the motivation because they think it's important. We've taught them pedagogically the why. And now we've said, make this individualized to you. Bring this in because it promotes critical thinking. It gets them to start reflecting. It gets them to engage on a meaningful way. And it starts to let them personalize it. Because again, there's one of me, there's a lot of them, and AI will now let them create explanations that match with what they're interested in. It will give them feedback on the things they care about. It will give them practice support only on the areas they need. And this kind of personalization simply isn't possible when there's one of me and lots of them. So we can ask them to evaluate, we can ask them to critique. Your job then is just to think about where this works. So hop into your course, try something. Take an assignment that you already have, throw it into AI and say, what would this produce? How can I change it? And then play with it. Because our goal is just to design activities where we're actually engaging students in a meaningful way. And it's really not about AI, but it's about designing in an era where we know AI exists. And so using AI where it helps, creating assignments that can get around AI where it doesn't or requires students to think, and then engaging in a meaningful way. With that said, we are right at the end of our time together. I believe we have a couple minutes if people have questions, but I'll open it up to Jeff to tell us if we have any time left to chit chat.
Thanks, Jane. Yes, respecting everybody's time. If you do need to jump, we said this was a 45-minute session, so feel free to drop off. However, if you do want to stick around for a few minutes, I'm sure Jane would be happy to answer a few questions, including this one. Mary Lou mentioned about students using more than one AI tool, and she's just wondering if there's these paid versions. Is that something that's included with a lot of students' tuition at all, or is it all if you just choose to sign up for them, or the paid version suffice?
It probably depends a little bit on your institution. I never require them to use a paid version. At GCU, they actually have access to Copilot as part of our enterprise license. And so at your university, they may have access as part of the enterprise license. but all of the tools do have a free level that students can use. And so I never require any paid versions, but I do teach them how to access the university approved paid version, which for us, we have an internal product called Mosaic, but then we also have an enterprise license to Copilot. So start by checking with your institution and see if there's any enterprise licenses available. But if not, free version will work for all of these activities.
One of the things I was, thank you. One of the things I was wondering, Gene, is we were talking about hallucinations and just generally with the technology, it's moving so fast, it's changing so fast. I'm wondering, is our hallucinations becoming less likely because it's AI is getting better by the day, or is it maybe more likely because people are using it so much more and there's so many tools out there and maybe it's just tripping up over itself? So, or is it just kind of it's just a part of the deal? Hallucinations are with us for a
Well,
while.
how about a little bit of both? What's happening is it's going to hallucinate unless you prompt correctly to not have it hallucinate. That's just because
Right.
that's how it works. It works by looking for patterns. And so it's going to operate as efficiently as it can, and it's just going to go get the patterns and tell you here's what your sources are. Unless you prompt properly, saying things like, this needs to be a real source. I need the link to it, include the DOI. If you give it that kind of prompting, it can give you a correct one and not hallucinate. So it's really more the user than it is the AI. Prompt it correctly and you can cut down on the hallucinations. But if you don't prompt it correctly, it's going to continue to hallucinate.
So this explains why I keep getting hallucinations. It's all on me.
It's all on you. You're a hallucinator, Jeff. Yeah.
I guess so. I guess so. Well, thank you so much for your time. There is a question for Tamsin that just came in. Curious about your thoughts on curating courses assignments that are of more quantitative nature, where learning resides more
Yeah.
within the practice. Hmm.
So that's where I actually do a lot, where I'll tell students like the which part I want them to do on their own, but then using AI to give them the feedback. And so doing things like, so let's face it, when I have my stats class, when I do require them to do it, if I don't say I need to see the handwriting, whatever, chances are they're just hopping into AI. But what I like is I can tell students, do it, take a picture, upload it, and it's going to tell you where you went wrong. Do it again because I want you to get it right, and AI can go through and find those errors for you. So I actually encourage my students to use it, and then I make sure my grading structure is going to reflect the fact that I didn't care more about just that final answer. But yeah, sometimes we just need them to practice. And if that's the case, I just make sure my grading isn't hinging on the correct answers because that's what's motivating them to use AI to bypass the learning. Mary Lou
Wonderful.
asked, did the study guide and AI questions actually work for her? We will find out today. She just took the final last night, so she has not yet got her chem final score back, but she told me she was feeling pretty good about it. So we'll see.
So one final question I have is just how you manage the assessment of a lot of these student engaged AI generated thinking, writing, and the feedback that they show you and the conversations that they have. Is that something that you actually outsource to an AI tool, or do you actually go through those logs yourself?
It both. It depends on the assignment and how many there are and the size of the class. So because we have an internal tool at GCU Mosaic, we are allowed to use that without any risk of FERPA violation, which is always the concern. And so if it's a class that I have a lot of those or those AI logs are really large, I will use Mosaic and I will say, here's my criteria, here's my rubric, help me evaluate the quality of the questions the student put, blah, blah, blah. And smaller ones or ones that I really want to dive in and see it myself, I might just review it. So it kind of depends on my workload, which strategy I go with. But I do make sure if I'm uploading student artifacts, particularly anything that could be identifiable, that I'm doing it in our enclosed system at GCU that is no risk of a FERPA violation.
Wonderful. Well, thanks everybody for your time today, and thanks, Gene, especially for being here and sharing your knowledge. Our next session is on June 3rd, the first Wednesday of June, and that's on teaching with AI. So I put the link up there in the chat. So please head on over there. You can also download some of the overview sheets for the different sessions, as well as catch the videos on demand for past ones. So for now, I think we'll wrap it up, but just want to say thanks to all again for showing up and being here and being a part of this session. Thanks, Gene.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.